The ER at St. Vincent Medical Center in Asheville, North Carolina, buzzed with urgency. Alarms rang. Gurneys rolled across the floor. A medley of voices, doctors shouting orders, patients moaning in pain, nurses coordinating, echoed like a chaotic symphony. But through it all, Rachel Monroe, a trauma nurse in her early 30s, moved like a metronome, measured, focused, unwavering. Her brown curls were tied back beneath her scrub cap, and the circles under her eyes hinted at a shift that had dragged on far too long. "Room 4 needs sutures," someone called. "On it," Rachel replied, her voice calm despite the adrenaline thrumming through her veins. Her sneakers squeaked faintly as she pivoted toward the trauma bay, clipboard in one hand, IV supplies in the other. It was her 9th hour on shift, but Rachel didn't stop to count. She never did. Then the doors burst open with a loud crash. "Male, mid-30s, rollover on Route 26, a paramedic shouted as the gurney flew in. "BP's crashing, possible internal bleeding. He's got a deep abdominal laceration. Lost a lot of blood in the field." Rachel glanced toward the incoming patient. He was pale, barely conscious, his chest rising shallowly beneath soaked gauze. Blood still pooled from his side despite the pressure bandage. "Blood type?" a nurse called from the computer. "A B negative," came the answer. The entire room paused. Rachel's heart skipped. She turned toward Dr. Jennings, the attending physician on call. He looked grim. "We're out," he muttered. "Last AB negative unit was used in OR 2 hours ago." Rachel didn't think. She stepped forward, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I'm AB negative." Dr. Jennings blinked at her. "Rachel, there's no time for testing or paperwork. I've been cleared. Healthy, no meds, no risks. You can draw from me now." Their eyes locked. He hesitated for only a heartbeat and then gave a sharp nod. "Get her to transfusion. Now." Within seconds, Rachel was seated in a rolling chair in the adjacent procedure room, sleeves pushed up, antiseptic swabbed across her arm. The nurse inserting the needle glanced at her with quiet disbelief. "You sure about this? Right in the middle of your shift?" Rachel didn't flinch. "What's the alternative? Let him die because it's inconvenient." The needle slid in. Warmth spread through her arm as the bag began to fill with her blood. Life that moments ago had been coursing through her, now flowing into a future she might never know. 20 minutes later, Rachel was in recovery, sipping lukewarm apple juice, her face pale but eyes alert. She didn't ask for extra time to rest. She didn't wait for praise. Once her vitals were steady, she pulled her hair back into a tighter ponytail and walked back toward the nurse's station. As she passed the OR waiting room, a snippet of hushed conversation floated her way. Two paramedics speaking softly. "His daughter's 6, one whispered. "They were coming back from her school recital. She's with a neighbor now, keeps asking if her dad's going to be okay." Rachel stopped. Her breath caught. She didn't know his name. She hadn't seen his face, just the blood, the bandage, the gurney, and the urgency. But now she knew he was a father. And somewhere in this city, a little girl was asking if her dad was going to come home. Rachel gripped the edge of the counter and let herself feel it. For just a second, the weight of what she'd done, the gamble she'd made. Not for recognition, not for heroism, but because doing nothing would have haunted her worse than the exhaustion she wore like second skin. She stood straighter. There were still more patients to care for. And as long as her legs could carry her, Rachel Monroe wasn't done yet. By the time Rachel stepped into her apartment, the city had already gone quiet. Rain whispered against the windows, a soft hush that seemed to echo her exhaustion. She dropped her keys onto the counter with a hollow clink and stood by the door for a moment, not moving, just breathing. The scent of antiseptic still clung to her clothes, mingling with the faint trace of lavender from her laundry detergent. The contrast felt oddly poetic, sterile survival mixed with a longing for calm. She didn't bother turning on the lights. The small space was familiar enough. The same creaky floorboard near the fridge, the faint hum of the heater kicking on. She walked barefoot across the hardwood, each step a reminder that her body was still sore from the blood draw just hours earlier. Her hand instinctively rubbed the faint bruise at the bend of her elbow, still tender. In the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, her reflection faint in the darkened window above the sink. Her cheeks were pale, eyes ringed with fatigue. Her hair, once neatly tied back, had come loose, a fitting symbol of the way she felt inside. Undone, unraveled, yet still standing. Her phone buzzed. "Maya, you alive?" Rachel stared at the message for a moment before typing back. "Rachel, barely. Come over tomorrow. I need breakfast and zero judgment." Maya, "Only if there's coffee." She gave a faint smile, one that flickered but didn't last. Then she curled up on the couch with an old blanket and a heating pad, the only combination that ever really convinced her body to stop. But her mind didn't listen. It never did after nights like this. Her thoughts circled like a carousel. Only this ride didn't have music or colored lights, just snapshots that replayed again and again. The man on the gurney, his blood soaking through gauze. The nurse calling out that they had no AB negative. The way she had stepped forward, almost without thinking, like her body knew something before her heart did. She hadn't even seen his face. She didn't know his name. But the moment she heard someone mention his daughter, something inside her clenched tight. She had once been that little girl. Her mother had worked 2 jobs, first at a diner, then cleaning houses on the weekends. Rachel used to wait by the front window for her, eyes fixed on the empty sidewalk, praying that her mom would come home safe. One day, her mom collapsed while cleaning an attic in July heat, a heat stroke. No one found her in time. Rachel was 10, so no, she hadn't given blood to a stranger. Not really. She had given it to a father who had someone waiting, just like she had once waited. But still, as she lay there beneath the blanket, her chest ached with something more than physical fatigue. It was the ache of constantly giving, of being seen as dependable but rarely understood. She remembered her ex-boyfriend Nick years ago telling her, "You're too selfless, Rachel. You give everything to everyone but yourself." Back then, it had sounded like admiration, but later it became permission. Permission for him to take, to borrow, to drain. When she was exhausted, he guilted her into staying. When she finally left, she felt like someone who had packed her bags not just from a bad relationship, but from a war zone. And yet, even now, the echo of that old hurt remained, like scar tissue, not bleeding anymore, but always tender when pressed. Her kindness had cost her. She knew that, but still she hadn't stopped being kind. She just gave differently now, with boundaries, with caution, with intention. Not because the world deserved it, but because if she ever stopped caring, if she ever let herself become cold, it would mean losing the very core of who she was. She turned on her side, staring at the ceiling. The storm outside had picked up. Thunder rolled low in the distance, followed by a flash of lightning that illuminated the room in brief silver light. It was strange, she thought, how you could feel full and empty at the same time, filled with purpose, yet aching with loneliness. She had saved a life tonight, but no one would know. No one would clap. And maybe that's what made it real, the kind of kindness that doesn't need applause, just conviction. Her eyes finally drifted shut as the thunder grew quieter. But before sleep claimed her, she thought once more of that little girl, the one asking if her daddy was going to be okay. Rachel hadn't done it for him. She'd done it for her, for the 10-year-old who never got to ask that question. Saturday morning brought with it a gentle breeze and the kind of sunshine that filtered through the clouds like it had been softened first. Rachel had the day off, a rarity. But even on her off days, she often found her way back to St. Vincent's, not to work, but to give. This time she carried a cardboard box of children's books she'd collected over the last few months. Stories about space, dogs who bake cookies, dinosaurs with anxiety. Books that made hospital rooms feel a little less sterile and a little more like childhood. The pediatric courtyard sat tucked behind the north wing, a green space with painted benches and a tiny play structure surrounded by flower beds. It wasn't big, but it was the closest thing to a park some of these kids would see for weeks. Rachel stepped outside and paused, letting the sun warm her face. Laughter rang out. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, was chasing bubbles across the grass. Her pigtails bounced as she ran, arms flailing joyfully, her dress catching the light like petals in motion. "Daddy, look, I caught 2, she squealed. Rachel's eyes followed the girl's gaze. There, seated on a bench near the butterfly garden, was a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a navy blue sweater that clung to him like armor. His body was angled slightly, favoring his left side. His right hand rubbed absently at his shoulder, the motion unconscious. A small wince flickered across his face when he moved too quickly. Still, he smiled at the girl, not the tired smile of obligation, but something warmer, present, focused, full. Rachel felt something twist gently in her stomach. She had seen that shoulder before, or more accurately, what lay beneath it. A deep laceration, nearly fatal, blood pooling faster than they could replace it. Her heart skipped. It was him, the man from the gurney, the one whose life had nearly slipped away beneath fluorescent lights and frantic voices. The one she had given her blood to. The father whose daughter had waited. Rachel stood still, half in shadow, the box of books suddenly feeling heavier in her arms. She hadn't expected this, hadn't braced for it. She'd spent so long telling herself it didn't matter if she never knew who he was, that the act had been enough. That goodness didn't need a face. And yet, here he was, smiling at the very person she had saved him for. His daughter. She could have turned away, slipped back through the double doors and let the moment pass. Let him remain anonymous. Let her kindness stay unnamed. But she didn't. She watched, not with pride, not with any hunger for recognition, just with quiet awe. He shifted again on the bench, and as he did, the hem of his sweater lifted slightly. Just enough for Rachel to catch a glimpse of the surgical scar, a faint raised line that traced across his lower rib cage and curved toward his side. Her own body flinched with phantom memory. He was whole. He was walking. He was laughing. She blinked quickly, something warm pressing behind her eyes. After a moment, he looked up. Their eyes met. It wasn't a movie moment. There was no swell of music or instant flash of understanding. Just a soft pause, a nod exchanged like two people recognizing the other's presence in a quiet, sacred space. She nodded back. That was all. A nurse stepped outside and called, "Sophie Harper?" The little girl turned. "That's me," she chirped, and ran toward the nurse without hesitation. The man, her father, rose slowly, again favoring his shoulder as he stood. He took Sophie's hand, and they disappeared into the pediatric wing, the glass doors sliding closed behind them with a soft hiss. Rachel stayed behind, unmoving. Her hand came up, pressing gently against her chest, not out of pain, but out of awe. A trembling acknowledgement that what she had given away in minutes had become a lifetime for someone else. She hadn't expected this, hadn't needed it. But seeing him there, whole and alive, gave weight to something she'd long struggled to believe, that sometimes what you pour out into the world really does come back. Not always in words, not always with thanks, but in laughter on a spring morning, in the way a little girl chases bubbles like nothing else matters, in the way a man smiles not because he's lucky, but because he's still here. Rachel exhaled slowly, then stepped inside. She didn't know his name. He didn't know hers, but their stories had already touched, like two branches bending briefly in the wind before parting again. And somehow that was enough. It started with polite nods. In the hallway outside pediatric recovery, by the elevator, once at the coffee kiosk when they reached for the same sugar packet and both gave a quick, embarrassed laugh. Rachel had always been good at reading people. Years of gauging patients' pain from the smallest flinches had made her an expert in unspoken emotion. And this man, Daniel Harper, as she eventually learned from the name on his visitor badge, wore his history quietly. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words were measured, never wasted. He listened more than he talked, and Rachel, to her surprise, liked that. He didn't try to charm her, didn't ask questions that scratched too close to her guarded places. He simply noticed things, how she always added cinnamon to her coffee, how she wore different sneakers depending on the shift, how she hummed under her breath when she charted in the afternoons. One day they ended up on the same bench outside the children's wing. Sophie was inside coloring with a volunteer, and Rachel had just stepped out with a cup of lukewarm green tea, her stethoscope still around her neck like a forgotten accessory. They sat in silence for a while, both staring out at the courtyard. Then Daniel spoke. Do you think everything happens for a reason? She turned slightly. That depends, she said. Are we talking cosmic fate or making sense of chaos after the fact? He smiled faintly. Maybe both. She waited. My wife, he said after a moment, died 3 years ago. Car accident. It was sudden. Sophie was 3. Rachel's hands stilled around her cup. I didn't know how to breathe after that, he continued, his voice low and steady, let alone how to raise a child. I shut down, became functional but not present, just moving through the days like they were tasks. He looked down at his hands. One of them absently rubbed his shoulder, the same one she'd seen him favor since the courtyard. Then the crash, he said. They told me I nearly bled out. Internal bleeding. If help had come a minute later. Rachel swallowed, her throat tightening. They said someone donated blood on the spot, Daniel went on. Someone in the hospital. They didn't have a name. Just said it was a nurse. A B negative. Rare. She stared ahead, heart thudding quietly against her ribs. I don't remember much, he said, but I do remember hearing someone, maybe a nurse, say, there's a little girl waiting for him. Don't let him go. That stuck with me. Like, someone out there believed I was worth saving, even when I didn't. Silence stretched between them, heavy and warm. Rachel didn't speak, not yet. Instead, without thinking, she reached out and gently touched his shoulder, the one he always guarded. Beneath the fabric, she could feel the faint ridge of his surgical scar. His breath caught slightly at the contact, but he didn't pull away. Some people survive because of medicine, she said softly. Others because someone stays. Daniel turned to face her, eyes searching. Maybe both, he murmured. Her hand dropped quietly into her lap. She still didn't tell him, not because she wanted to hide it, but because in that moment, it no longer felt like hers to hold. The story belonged to him now, his second chance, his daughter's laughter. The slow rebuilding of a man who had almost been lost. She had only been the bridge. Letting him walk across was the miracle. He glanced at her cup. You always sit like that? She raised an eyebrow. Like what? Like someone who's holding more than a drink. She gave a faint smile. Maybe, but sometimes holding it is better than spilling it too soon. He laughed, really laughed, and the sound of it made something bloom in her chest she hadn't felt in a long time. Not affection, not even attraction, but permission to feel something again. Whatever it was between them, it wasn't rushed. It unfolded slowly, like a page turning in a well-worn book, each sentence more comforting than the last. Neither of them named it, neither tried to force it. It simply existed, in glances and conversations that stretched longer each day, in the way Sophie started calling Rachel Miss Rach, without prompting. Rachel never asked for more, but a part of her, quiet, hidden, started to hope. And for someone who had once stopped believing in hope, that felt like a beginning. Daniel hadn't meant to overhear it. He was walking down the corridor on the 3rd floor, on his way to Sophie's speech therapy session, when he slowed near the nurse's station. 2 doctors leaned against the counter, mid-conversation, the kind of casual banter that filled in the gaps between rounds. Remember that car crash case last spring? One asked, sipping coffee. Guy almost bled out. A B negative. We were out of blood, thought we were going to lose him. Oh yeah, the other replied. Would have died if Monroe hadn't stepped up. She donated her own blood, right in the middle of her shift. No hesitation. Daniel stopped cold. His lungs emptied. Monroe, Rachel, his heart pounded as their voices faded into the background. Everything around him blurred. The hallway walls, the posters about flu shots, the ticking of the clock above the waiting room. Only one thought remained. It was her. All this time, he hadn't dared to imagine, hadn't put the pieces together, even as they sat on benches and shared tea in silence. He had felt something pulling him toward her. Yes, but now the pull had a name, a weight, a truth. She had saved his life and never told him. He didn't go to Sophie's session. Instead, he walked, almost on autopilot, to the staff lounge and waited. His hands shook as he clasped them together, elbows on his knees, breath coming hard and fast. 15 minutes passed. Then Rachel stepped in, clipboard in one hand, coffee in the other. She looked tired, focused, her scrubs slightly wrinkled from a long shift. But when she saw him, she froze. Their eyes locked. "Daniel," she said softly, a question threaded in her tone. "I need to ask you something," he said, standing. She set the clipboard on the counter slowly. "Okay. Was it you?" There was no need to explain the question. She knew. Rachel didn't try to deflect. She didn't pretend. She simply met his eyes and gave the smallest, saddest nod. A breath left him like a gut punch. "You knew," he said, voice cracking. "You knew, and you never told me." "There wasn't a reason to," she said gently. "You were healing. That mattered more." His jaw tightened. "Why would you do that? For someone you didn't even know?" Rachel held his gaze. "Because someone said your daughter was waiting for you, and I couldn't bear the thought of a little girl losing her dad. Not if I could help it." He blinked rapidly, and for a moment, his expression faltered. Pain, awe, confusion, all tangled. "You gave me back to her," he whispered, "and to myself. And then you kept it to yourself." "I wasn't hiding," she said. I didn't want what I did to change how you looked at me." "How could it not?" His voice was shaking now. "You walked back into work after donating your own blood, without even telling me, without expecting a thing." "That's why it mattered," she said quietly. "Because I wasn't looking for thanks. I just couldn't stand still and do nothing." Daniel took a step forward, then another. "You didn't just save my life," he said, his hand reaching out gently. "You reminded me that goodness still exists, that kindness isn't dead, that someone might still care, not because they have to, but because it's who they are." Rachel swallowed hard, tears threatening. "You think I don't care," she said, voice cracking. "I haven't stopped thinking about you since that night. I wasn't even supposed to hear about your daughter, but once I did, once I knew, you weren't a stranger anymore. You were a father, and I couldn't do nothing." Silence wrapped around them, heavy and electric. Then Daniel reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "I thought I had to protect you," he said, voice low. "I thought if I let you in, you'd see all the broken pieces and leave. I've lost too much already." Rachel's eyes filled. "You think I'm afraid of broken?" she whispered. "I live in it. I work in it. I carry it every day. But I don't give up on people just because they hurt. I stayed by your side, not out of pity, but because something in me believed you were worth saving. Still are." Daniel's grip tightened around hers. His thumb brushed the back of her hand, still faintly bruised from the IV line she'd taken that night. He looked at her like she wasn't just the woman who had saved him, but the woman who might just save him again. Not with blood this time, but with love. 1 year later, the hospital courtyard looked nothing like it used to. Where once there were quiet benches and the hush of distant sirens, now there were white canopies strung with twinkle lights, tables decorated with red ribbons, and laughter rising like music into the spring air. A banner swayed gently between two trees, a drop of hope. Annual blood drive and celebration of life. Rachel stood just off stage, her blue sundress swaying in the breeze, clipboard in hand. Her scrubs had been replaced by soft fabric and bare shoulders, but her stance remained the same. Steady, focused, heart forward. The drive had started as a whisper of an idea, something small and quiet she'd hoped would honor the life she once helped save. Now it had become something more. It had connected donors with recipients, brought awareness to rare blood types, inspired hospitals in neighboring counties to begin their own versions. It had created a community rooted not in tragedy, but in healing. Daniel stood nearby, dressed in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He wasn't behind a podium or on a stage. He didn't need to be. His presence was felt in every detail. The logistics he'd quietly coordinated, the grants he'd helped secure, the volunteers he'd rallied. His name badge read, Daniel Harper, advocate, survivor, father. But that wasn't what Rachel noticed. She saw him holding 2 lemonades, one for her, one for Sophie, who skipped ahead, pigtails bouncing, a red ribbon tied in her hair. Rachel crouched down beside Sophie and handed her a folded piece of paper. "You sure you're ready?" she asked. Sophie nodded fiercely. "Daddy helped me practice. Twice." The crowd grew quiet as Rachel stepped up to the mic. "Thank you all for being here," she began. "A year ago, this was just an idea, a way to honor something that changed my life. Today, it's a reminder that small actions can ripple out farther than we ever imagine." Applause followed. Then Sophie climbed the step stool someone had set up, her paper shaking slightly in her hands. "My name is Sophie Harper," she said, voice clear, "and I'm almost 7. Laughter rippled across the courtyard. "My daddy's alive because someone gave him blood when he needed it most. That someone is Rachel. She's not just a nurse. She's kind and brave, and she makes the best blueberry pancakes ever." The audience chuckled again, several people wiping at their eyes. "And I love her," Sophie said more quietly now, "because she gave my daddy a second heart, and now we all share it." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of breath held, of truth recognized. Daniel stepped onto the stage. He didn't speak at first, just looked at Rachel with the kind of gaze that didn't ask for attention. It gave it. Then he reached into his pocket. Rachel's breath caught. He knelt right there on the wooden stage, under twinkling lights and the faint scent of blossoms. In his hand was a velvet box. Inside, a delicate gold ring with a red sapphire nestled at its center, like a drop of blood, a heartbeat, a promise. "I don't know how long this life will be," Daniel said, "but I know who I want to spend it with." The world stilled. "Rachel Monroe, will you marry me?" She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her tears were answer enough. When she finally whispered yes, the crowd rose in applause. Sophie rushed into their arms. And in that tangle of limbs and laughter, something unshakable took root. Not perfection, not fairy tale, but a real life, born of quiet bravery, steady love, and a choice that began with one drop of hope. In a world that often glorifies grand gestures and loud declarations, we sometimes forget the quiet power of a single, selfless act. The story of Rachel, a nurse who donated blood mid-shift to save a man she didn't know, reminds us that true kindness rarely asks for attention. It doesn't perform. It simply shows up when needed most. But perhaps what's more profound is how that act echoed far beyond the moment it happened. Rachel never sought recognition. Yet what she gave, a second chance at life, came back to her in a way she never expected, through connection, healing, and eventually love. This reminds us of a timeless truth. Doing good may not always bring immediate reward, but it always plants a seed. For older adults, especially those who have lived long enough to see how fragile life can be, this story is a gentle affirmation that the values we hold dear, compassion, humility, responsibility, are not outdated. They are timeless. The world still needs them, and they still matter. Rachel's journey also teaches us about boundaries in giving. Her kindness wasn't naive, it was intentional. She had learned through heartache and experience that being a good person doesn't mean allowing others to take from you without limit. It means choosing to give where it matters, when it matters, even when no one sees. And Daniel's transformation reminds us that even after grief, even after life has broken you down, redemption is possible. People can change, hope can return, and love can find its way back, not because everything is perfect, but because two imperfect people choose to show up again and again. In our everyday lives, we may never be asked to donate blood on the spot, but we'll have opportunities to listen, to give, to forgive, to protect. The smallest acts, a call, a hand, a presence, might one day be the lifeline someone else is holding on to. So don't wait for applause. Let your kindness be quiet, but steadfast. Because in the end, it may be the one drop of hope that turns someone's whole life around.